Hello, this is Alister McGrath again, and in a series of short presentations we're going to engage with three texts taken from my widely used theological textbook, the Christian Theology Reader. Our third and final reading is taken from the writings of Augustine of Hippo, the bishop of the Roman city of Hippo Regius in Roman North Africa. Today the city is known as Annaba in Tunisia. It's not far from Carthage, where Cyprian was bishop. And you'll remember that we looked at his ideas about the Christian hope in our previous presentation. To make sense of this reading from the writings of Augustine of Hippo, we need to understand its cultural background. Christianity had been an illegal religion in the Roman Empire until the 4th century. And one of the most important debates in the early church concerned the extent to which Christians could appropriate the immense cultural legacy of the classical world, its poetry, philosophy, and education. In what way could the rich classical cultural tradition be adopted by Christian writers? Could philosophy be used in the service of faith, or did using this pagan literary tradition amount to compromising the essentials of the Christian faith? It was no idle question for Christians who had long regarded the Roman state as an enemy. Why use the ideas of an enemy? One early answer to this important question was given by Justin Martyr in the 2nd century. Justin Martyr had been martyred for his faith. Now, he had a particular concern to exploit the parallels between Christianity and Platonism as a way of communicating the gospel. For Justin, the seeds of divine wisdom had been sown throughout the world, which meant that Christians could and should expect to find aspects of the gospel reflected outside the church. A second and rather more negative answer was given by Tertullian in the 3rd century. What, he asked, had Athens to do with Jerusalem? What relevance had the Platonic Academy for the Christian church? For Tertullian, Christianity must maintain its distinctive identity by avoiding this kind of secular influence. For Tertullian, using secular philosophy would just corrupt the Christian faith. Nobody, he said, should taint Christian theology with Roman ideas. However, things changed. With the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine in 313, Christianity ceased to be persecuted throughout the empire. No longer was Christianity illegal. It no longer had to behave as an underground movement, holding its meetings in secret and concentrating simply on surviving from day to day. Theologians now enjoyed freedom to work without the threat of persecution. As Roman culture became more relaxed about Christianity, many theologians began to think that the time had come to rethink the relation of Christian faith and Roman culture, including the way in which Christianity could use secular philosophical ideas. Augustine now formulated an approach that many found both realistic and welcome. Augustine's approach basically was about the critical appropriation of classical culture. For Augustine, the situation is comparable to Israel fleeing from captivity in Egypt at the time of the Exodus. The biblical narrative spoke of the Israelites leaving Egypt, taking some of its wealth with them. And Augustine argued that the people of Israel left the bondage of Egypt behind, but took its gold and silver with them. And these riches could now be put to the service of the people of God. It didn't matter what the Egyptians did with them. The important thing was what Israel now did with these riches. In much the same way, Augustine argued, the philosophy and culture of the ancient world could be appropriated by Christians, where this seemed to be right, and thus allowed to serve the cause of the Christian faith. And Augustine clinched his argument by pointing out how several recent distinguished Christians had made use of classical writers in advancing the gospel. So let's look at the text and see what he has to say on this matter. So please turn to it now. It's reading 1:4 on page 7 of the Christian Theology Reader. Please read it through and pause this presentation while you do that. When you're ready to go, press play again. So I look forward to seeing you very soon. So let's begin by looking at the opening statement of this reading. If those who are called philosophers, particularly the Platonists, have said anything which is true and consistent with our faith, we must not reject it, but claim it for our own use. Now, Augustine is here countering the attitude of earlier writers like Tertullian, who regard secular philosophy as an enemy, something that was contaminated and dangerous. For Tertullian, Christians should have nothing to do with it. But Augustine's approach is rather different. Where Tertullian said, look, you should never engage with the academy, with pagan wisdom, Augustine says, look, we can do something with this. And in his major work on Christian doctrine, Augustine used the controlling image of the exodus of Israel from Egypt to make his case for the critical appropriation of classical wisdom. Listen to what he has to say. The Egyptians possessed idols and heavy burdens, which the children of Israel hated and from which they fled. However, they also possessed vessels of gold and silver and clothes, which our forebears in leaving Egypt took for themselves. So for Augustine, pagan philosophy is neither to be affirmed nor rejected in its totality. Christian theology is free to evaluate it and appropriate things whenever they are useful. Here's how Augustine puts it. Pagan learning is not entirely made up of false teachings and superstitions. It contains also some excellent teachings well suited to be used by truth. So the point that Augustine is making here is that what is true in Greek philosophy is due to divine providence. These are not truths that classical philosophers made up for themselves. Rather, they were things they dug out of the minds of the providence of God. These truths, Augustine argues, are divinely endorsed. So Augustine clinches his argument by appealing to the example of Cyprian of Carthage, whose skill in rhetoric and philosophy were widely admired. Look at the wealth of gold and silver of clothes which Cyprian, that eloquent teacher and blessed martyr, brought with him when he left Egypt. Augustine's point here is that Cyprian's period as a pagan led to him gaining rhetorical and philosophical skills, which he was then able to put to the service of the church. Well, that's the end of this short series of presentations on 3 texts taken from the Christian Theology Reader. I hope you found them helpful, and this will be useful in encouraging you to do some more reading and reflecting on your own. What I've tried to do in this short series of presentations is show you how to interact with texts and get the most out of reading them. The commentary and study questions provided for each of the nearly 400 readings will help you go deeper and will allow you to make the most of your reading. So thank you very much indeed for listening to me, and I hope you'll enjoy using these texts and find yourself encouraged and enriched by the 400 readings which will open up the Christian theological tradition for your study. Again, thank you so much for listening.